Many fairy tales have dark origins, but the story of Sleeping Beauty tops it all in terms of blood, abuse, and other of the worst facets of humanity. Disney's version of the curse of the princess who falls into a deep sleep until she is awakened by the kiss of a prince's true love is a far cry from the frightening 17th century original plot. The time has come to learn about the real Sleeping Beauty saga. For sure, after today, you will never see Princess Aurora in the same way again. Welcome to the mysteries of the unknown. One of the most famous fairy tales of all time, Sleeping Beauty is a narrative that originated in folk tradition. The plot follows the fate of a young princess who is cursed soon after birth. Offended that she was not invited to her baptism, a witch invades the party and announces that the girl will be stung by the spindle of a fear and enter a deep, death-like sleep. While the fairy godmothers strive to make the girl's life full of joy, the witch is selfish and finds satisfaction in the act of harming her. Despite her parents' attempts to protect her, the curse comes true and she falls asleep. Thus, only true love can break the spell and bring the princess back to life. This is probably the version you have always heard about, but in reality the plot is much more terrible than you might imagine. The version adapted by Disney, very light compared to the original, was an adaptation by the Brothers Grimm written in only 9 sentences, whose moral of the plot seems to lie in the duality of magic that can be used to do good or evil. The real story of Sleeping Beauty is called Sun, Moon and Talia, released in the year 1634 by the Italian author Giambattista Basile. In it, the princess named Talia, not Aurora as in the Disney movie, who is well known for her great beauty, falls faint when a splinter of flax gets under her fingernail. At first they thought that Talia had died, but when they realized that she was still breathing, her family created a palace for her, where she would remain alone and locked up until she awakened. The story of the beautiful, unconscious princess traveled the world, but was eventually forgotten. More than 100 years later, the palace was abandoned and forgotten, until a young king who was passing by found it. Curious, he decides to investigate the palace and enters through the window. The king is surprised to find in one of the halls the beautiful princess unconscious, in a cloak of sadness. He first believes the young woman to be dead, but soon realizes that blood runs in her veins. She was alive. Attracted by such beauty, he takes advantage of her, abusing her unconsciousness. After having satisfied himself with this horrendous act, the monarch returns to his kingdom and his queen and forgets Talia completely. But the act brought consequences. Talia becomes pregnant by her abuser, and after 9 months gives birth to twins, named Sun and Moon. The birth was natural in every way, without any accompaniment. With no one to support them, the babies began to get hungry, and could not find their mother's breasts to feed. Looking for whatever felt the most like suckling, they then began to suck the fingers of the unconscious princess. Their hunger was such that one of them managed to suck the sliver of flax jammed under Talia's fingernail, who wakes up immediately. Instead of screaming in confusion, the princess simply sees the babies crying with hunger and begins to nurse them, guided by her maternal instinct. At this same time, the king remembered the princess, and decided to visit her again, giving his queen the excuse that he was going hunting and wanted solitude. When he arrives at the palace of the beautiful princess, he again enters through the window and, to his surprise, finds Talia and the twins. Once again enchanted by the princess, and falling madly in love with her, he tells her what happened between them. Even so, Talia and the Sovereign spend a few days together, in love. After the long hunting trip and the king's strange compulsion to repeat the names of Talia and the babies aloud, the queen began to suspect her husband and, after investigating thoroughly, eventually discovered the king's treachery with the once-dead princess. Overcome with hatred and jealousy, the queen sets up a revenge. The idea was to kill and cook the children for her husband to taste. She kidnaps the two babies and takes them to the royal cook and tells him the terrible plan. Shocked by the queen's plan, the royal cook decides to hide the babies in his house and prepares a lamb for the meal. Upon discovering her plan foiled, the queen goes to the cook's house, who had already fled into the forest with the babies. Filled with even more hatred, the queen now has Talia kidnapped, wanting to burn the princess at the stake. The princess, about to be burned to death, begins to scream with all her might in the woods next to the castle. The king hears her screams and runs to see what is happening. On the way, he meets the cook, who reveals that the queen had told him to cook the babies for him to eat. Disgusted with his wife, he arrives on the scene and is shocked to see the princess about to be burned. The king tries to stop the queen from committing the crime and ends up throwing his own wife into the fire. In the end, Talia becomes the wife of her abuser and they live happily ever after with their children. The story ends with the proverb, "Those whom fortune favors / find good fortune even in their sleep." Many must be shocked by this ending, since the real villain, the king, who violently abused the princess and murdered his own wife, ends up with a happy ending. But in the movie Maleficent, which is part of a series in which Disney's goal is to humanize the famous villains of its classic animations, makes the king the traitor of the story and dies in the end. This tragic end was perhaps a punishment for the king's behavior in the tale by the Italian Giambattista Basile. In this video you have just learned the true and tragic story of the fairy tale Sleeping Beauty. If you know of other such tales, please write in the comments. And also be sure to give your impressions and suggestions to the channel, always remembering to give a like and share this video with your friends. And don't miss the next video of the channel, with another mysterious curiosity. See you in the next Mysteries of the Unknown video.